Hello, hope you're doing well. I have been really busy this past month, and while I admit that that does seem to be my default state, it has felt especially so during the past couple weeks. For good reasons, thankfully, like very creative reasons, but still rather exhausting reasons nonetheless. That said though, I have managed to nab a bit of time to recharge here and there during this month, and I'm slowly clearing my calendar of deadlines, which means that I'm finally getting back into the video making zone. I say finally, it hasn't really been that long, but it definitely feels like ages, so, Before we get started on today's video though, I should probably mention that this one is sponsored by SPEEDPAINT. This'll be the third or fourth time now, I think, that they've been kind enough to sponsor one of my videos, which is really cool because ever since I started getting to grips with the program last year, it's very quickly become my go-to software for all of my creative work. Whether I'm working on illustration or concept art or comics or animation, nowadays I even use it to make the thumbnails for my videos, so pretty much universally, I just genuinely can't recommend it enough if you're doing anything creative. With that in mind anyway, today I wanted to go ahead and focus on a very specific creative avenue and share a couple of tools and tips and tricks with you guys that I personally tend to use whenever I'm trying to figure out character designs in Clip Studio. And even more specifically, I wanted to talk a little bit about making character reference sheets. But in order to do that, we're gonna need a character to work with. So because my previous Clip Studio speed paints have made for a pretty good chance to kind of go back in time and revisit some of my long-forgotten OCs and just give them a fresh coat of paint, I figured that that would probably be a good starting point this time around as well. So I had a bit of a rifle through my very old DeviantArt uploads, as well as some even more ancient paper notepads, and many questionable pieces of character art later, I ended up choosing this one, which is pretty striking. Best as I can tell, this character's name was Holly, but honestly, it may as well have been Mary Sue, because according to my childhood writings, she could just do everything. If I recall correctly though, that actually wasn't very impressive, because so could every other notable character in the story she was made for. That story was called Hex, and really there wasn't much to it besides a bunch of characters who were basically meant to be magical spies in a modern-day setting. I'm gonna save any more details that might exist on all of that for further into the video though, because whatever else I might be able to recall is likely gonna feed into the redesign of this very colourful character. So yeah, without further ado, I think it's time to dive in and see if we can't freshen this one up a bit. Alrighty, so diving right into it, the first kind of character design and reference sheet making method that I wanted to take a look at is, well, this thing probably does have a proper technical name, but I tend to just call it the T-pose. This is basically a really rough, really simplified way of laying out a character design, which I personally tend to use while in the very early stages of kind of figuring out costumes and hairdos and all of that good stuff. And right off the bat with this one, I get to talk about one of the most invaluable tools that I use while working on these kinds of sketches, which is called the Symmetry ruler. As you can see, it pretty much draws a purple line any which way across your canvas that you might need, which acts as a mirror, so anything that you draw on one side of it will be automatically reflected directly opposite. It is a major time saver when working on any directly front-facing kind of drawings like this, or when you might just need to draw something symmetrical in general for whatever reason. When using any kind of ruler tool in Clip Studio, it applies a little triangular icon onto whichever layer it was that you had selected while using that tool, and you can then click or right-click on that symbol to show or hide the ruler. When it's visible, its effects are active, and when it's hidden, it's like it's not even there and you can just draw completely as usual. You can also drag that ruler icon around within your layers palette to apply it to different layers and even entire layer folders, depending on what exactly it is that you want that ruler to be affecting. For me, in this case, I started out with the Symmetry ruler only applied to the layer that I was drawing the basic character kind of T-pose shape onto, before realizing that it would probably be a better idea to just apply it to the entire sketching folder that I was drawing in, since I tend to make quite a few different layers when roughing out the different potential parts of an outfit so that I can kind of turn things on and off as I need to see what works. And it would just save a lot more time to just have everything automatically under the effects of the Symmetry ruler rather than like dragging it to the particular layer that I was using every single time. So, yeah. Now the point of drawing up this T-pose anyway was to be able to see the original version of this character design side by side with the updated version that I wanted to make. It's all well and good having my old sketchbook stuff next to me for reference, but the style they were drawn in, if you can call it a style, I feel like that's a bit generous, but the style that they were drawn in is obviously very, very outdated by now since I drew them all the way back in 2010. And sometimes it's more helpful to have both versions, old and new, drawn in the same pose and with the same much more up-to-date art style, so that I can make a much more direct comparison between the two. As you can see, once I had a basic pose drawn up, I duplicated it, which also duplicated that symmetry ruler, so I don't need to make another one while hoping that I can get it in the exact same place down the middle of the drawing and inevitably be way off the mark. And from there, I just dove in and started sketching the original version of the character design here on the left. I mentioned before that the story this character was from was basically about magical spies or something to that effect, but evidently, at least I think, that's not really the impression that this outfit is giving. To me, it looks much more like a civilian outfit with a kind of Dennis the Menace meets Hot Topic kind of vibe, which, again, not quite what we're going for. So, I should be perfectly clear here though, if you are aiming for that kind of vibe, like if your goal is to have that kind of like Hot Topic Dennis the Menace energy because that like genuinely suits the like story that you're telling and the world that you're building, then that's groovy. There is nothing wrong with that at all. However, I know for a fact that when I made this character and the kind of story and setting that she came from, that was not what I was aiming for. I just genuinely thought that this was like the peak of what a cool secret agent would look like. And you know, at least in my personal opinion, I think I did miss the mark on that a little bit, and there are definitely improvements that could be made. The main thing that comes to mind being that, at least to me, again, overall this character's original visual design was a little bit too far on the busy side of things. Definitely a case of a few too many colors and patterns making everything way too muddled, and I also have no idea what was happening with her hairstyle. And that's not just a present-day exaggeration, I mean literally when I made the character, like in one of the sketchbook pages that I was looking at, there was a note written next to her that said, "Just put the red in her hair anywhere when it's down." I know I was a kid when I made this design, but I am retroactively smacking myself on the head for that because that is baffling. If there's one major piece of advice that I could give through this video, it is to not leave yourself flying blind like that. Like, character design is fun and everything, and certainly in the early stages there's a lot of good things that can be made by being random and freewheeling stuff. But once you're trying to nail that design down and use it like repeatedly in a comic or something like that, you are going to be absolutely kicking yourself if you're trying to fill in like the colors of a character's hair and all you have to work with is a note that says just put it wherever, because consistency is key. So what I wanted to try and do when updating Holly's look was give her an outfit that would be more appropriate for the setting she was made for, specifically something more becoming of a magical secret agent, and I really wanted to try and give her a more striking silhouette as well, because like I say, her original costume was just a pretty everyday civilian kind of outfit, nothing to really write home about in terms of the shape, which is usually not what you want for an iconic main character. In her original design, she did at least sometimes have her hair up in a big spiky ponytail, which I decided to keep in this updated version because I do think that was quite a fun feature. The main difference here is just that instead of putting the red patches in randomly, I decided to completely fill the underside and inside areas of her hair with red instead, giving it a much less confusing two-tone kind of style that can be really easily defined with line work. I also wanted to tone her color palette down a bit from those really bright, super saturated shades just to make her a bit easier to look at, and tried to give those colors a bit more room to breathe throughout the design by using a neutral shade of black for the bulk of her outfit, and then breaking that up with little touches of those brighter reds and blues, rather than just covering her in stripes. And finally, instead of having her stick with the Mary Sue with every possible superpower angle, I wanted to instead focus on one signature ability that she could have and then try to highlight or at least hint at it with her visual design. In this case, the way that I decided to alter her costume to reflect that was by giving her a clear jacket with a fun, puffy sleeved kind of shape. Not only because I really enjoy drawing puffy sleeves, but also because it's kind of a two birds one stone solution for that bland silhouette problem that I mentioned before. The reason for her having a clear jacket specifically though, is something that I think I'll try and go into a bit more detail on while we take a look at the other kind of reference sheet that I wanted to talk about today. Now, this next kind of character reference sheet is much more detailed than the sketchier T-pose variety that we just looked at, and again, there's probably a more accurate technical name for it, maybe a model sheet or something similar. But the long and short of it is that this kind of layout is closer to the kind that you would see used in comics and animation, and generally any of those kinds of projects where, like I said before, consistency is very much key. For me, I just call it a front and back view or a turnaround, and these are how I tend to go about finalizing the fully detailed, clean version of any design that I've already roughed out with a T-pose. The goal of making a turnaround sheet like this is usually to cover all your bases and draw the character from multiple angles, front, back. Sometimes people will also include a view from the side if they feel like that's going to be helpful as well. And the point of drawing the same character from various angles like this is so that if you ever get stuck or feel like you're forgetting something while working on the comic or animation that they might feature in, you can really quickly and easily check their reference sheet and make sure that you're not missing any details out, no matter what pose it is that you might be trying to draw them in. Now, my personal preference when making front and back views like this is to treat them as proper character illustrations and try to give their poses a bit of actual personality, which, as you might already be able to tell, is a pretty stark difference from the completely expressionless T-poses that we worked on a moment ago. But speaking of poses and personality anyway, whether you're working on a confident character or a nervous one or anything in between, I would recommend putting them in a pose like this, where you have one arm hanging down and one raised outwards. Partly for readability to make sure that there are no limbs blocking your view of the character's torso, but also partly so that you can show how the drapery of any sleeves or capes or generally longer costume elements might look. And although I'm only recommending one specific kind of pose right now, there are still plenty of ways that you can fine-tune a stance like this in order to make your character's body language really match their personality. Even if you're working on an entire cast of character reference sheets and every single one was striking this same exact pose, there's not really any need to worry about them looking too similar or worrying whether posing all of your reference sheets the same way will look too boring, because at the end of the day, you're going to have plenty of chances to draw your character in 100 different cool and complicated poses. But as I've said, the main point of making a reference sheet like this is just functionality and readability and essentially saving yourself from confusion later on down the line. And something that you will 100% thank yourself for, especially if you ever want to come back and draw alternate outfits for your character, is making sure that their limbs don't cross over their torso and block out a bunch of important details. And I realize that I'm really hammering that whole don't put the limbs over the torso thing home by now, but it's only because I've made that exact mistake dozens of times and it's always a colossal pain in the neck. So yeah, I'm just very much hoping that you guys can be a little bit smarter than me on that front. Having said that though, evidently my way of doing things is by no means the only correct way of going about doing things, because I make things up as I go and I make mistakes a lot all the time. This is just the kind of posing and layout that works the best for me, but if there's another way that works best for you, then by all means go with that one. This is very much just general advice, and the hope is that there'll be something mixed into this general advice that you can then translate over into your own way of working. But yeah, I think I mentioned something about alternate outfits just now, and that does actually remind me that there is one other thing that I would normally always try to do for a turnaround like this, and that is to ink and color the character independently from their costume, which is to say, draw them without their clothes on. And the reason for that is because that way you will have a ready-made base that will save you a ton of time in the future if you ever want to come back and make another front and back reference sheet for your character, but wearing a different outfit. It's basically just a case of inking the outline of their body shape and then filling it with the color of their skin tone. The only details that are really necessary, besides obviously filling in their face and hair, everything above the neck basically, is maybe any notable scars or tattoos that your character might have elsewhere on their body. Now, even though that particular technique is not anything spicy at all, like I say, it's basically just kind of like drawing a blank Barbie body, I genuinely didn't know if YouTube would take kindly to me drawing a female character without clothes, even if it's just kind of a technicality for, practical time-saving purposes, so I kind of ended up skipping that step for this recording, which, hopefully you guys can understand that wasn't really a gamble that I thought it was wise to take. Having said that though, even though I didn't end up making a blank default character base for this particular piece, I did still use that kind of folder organization and layering method when it came to drawing Holly's jacket, which is to say that I made sure to draw it separately in its own layer folder. I did the same thing on the T-pose sheet as well actually, because whenever I have a character with a jacket or anything similar, I always prefer being able to toggle it in and out of view and make sure that their outfit looks okay both with it and without it. You also never really know when your character might end up losing a jacket or something, so Ultimately, it's also just really helpful to be able to turn it off and on and check the details underneath it if you need to. While we're on the topic though, I did have a couple more thoughts about this jacket that are kind of fun. So while I was sketching and inking and generally working on this redesign, I thought that maybe if Holly is from a story about magical spies, then maybe this jacket is the uniform of the magical spy organization. I'm pretty sure I mentioned at the start of the video that the story that Holly came from was called Hex, and the reason that that was the title of the story is because that was also the name of the magical spy headquarters. So in order to kind of harken back to that with this jacket, I put a hexagon-shaped emblem on the sleeve. My other main thought about this jacket as well was that maybe these jackets could be enchanted or just have some other kind of mystical property to them that makes them style themselves to match their owner when they first put them on. So if a fire magician put one on, then they might end up with a jacket covered in Guy Fieri flames. If there was a light magician, for example, they might end up with glitter, or they might end up with just like a kind of high-vis workman's jacket kind of look. And then in Holly's case, according to my old notepads, she could turn invisible, which was apparently a standout ability amongst her sea of many, many other abilities, so that was the one that I ended up narrowing down as her kind of main skill set for this redesign. Invisibility seems both appropriate for a spy and pretty funny for such a flashy looking character, so it seemed like a fun one to go for, and I thought that a clear jacket would make a nice kind of visual allusion to that power. It was a bit plain looking at first, to be honest. I just kind of filled it in with white at half opacity, but then I used one of my favorite custom effect brushes to give it a cool swirly pattern that really made it pop. And as a matter of fact, that also reminds me to do the coloring on, well, not only this piece, but just kind of a lot, if not all of the pieces that I've been working on recently. I also get to use a tool which may well be my all-time favorite across any program. The best way that I can think to describe it is that it is a lasso tool that can automatically detect your ink work and then apply color only within the lines, which for one thing is absolutely genius and I have no idea how it works, and for another thing is just so incredibly useful. It has sped up my coloring process by leaps and bounds and light years. All you have to do to make it work is designate the layer that you have your line work on as a reference layer by clicking the little lighthouse button in the layers palette. And then you can adjust the sensitivity of the lasso to suit whatever your inking style might be, whether it's more joined up or a little bit more loose. The only thing with this tool is that I actually don't know the name of it off the top of my head because I can never remember what it's called in English. However, if you go into the Clip Studio asset library and search for the word fill, and then filter by popularity, it's literally one of the first results, with a rather recognizable icon which I will hopefully be able to show you guys on screen as I'm saying this. Also probably worth noting, there is a matching tool that works in pretty much the same way, it just erases instead of filling the areas that you select. Altogether, they are an incredibly useful set of tools to have to hand. Anyway, technical stuff aside, one more helpful thing to do on a fully detailed reference sheet like this is to leave room for some expression sketches. I only ended up doing a profile view of Holly's face and a guesstimation of what her hair might look like if it was out of her ponytail in this version, which, you know, I assume if your hair looks that big when it's up, then it's probably going to be pretty fluffy when it's down. So, yeah, there's that. This particular reference sheet is more of an example one rather than being anything that I am personally intending to use for a long-term project, so I didn't go super in-depth with the expression sketches. However, if you were working on a whole cast of characters and you had to make reference sheets for all of them, you might want to write a list of different expressions down, like happy, crying, angry, that kind of thing, and then make sure that on each character's reference sheet you include a sketch of each of those emotions, because that way you can make a direct comparison between what each character looks like when they're feeling a certain way. Although I didn't do so on this one, it can also be really helpful to include more detailed close-up drawings of smaller props and accessories on a sheet like this as well. For bigger or more important props, I tend to just make them their own turnaround sheets like I would for a character, but if it was just something like a belt buckle or a small accessory that featured on a character's outfit, then those are the kind of things that it can be quite handy to include next to their main sort of drawings like this. Now, evidently I drew everything on this sheet completely freehand, but if you have a lot of character sheets to make, maybe you're working on a big project or something, then I would definitely recommend using the 3D models within Clip Studio as a base instead, just to save yourself a bit of time and energy. To show you what I mean, I recorded a really quick example here of how I might go about setting up some models for a turnaround sheet, like the one I just made. And although they can take a bit of getting used to when you first start trying to figure them out, It literally ended up taking me 3 minutes to make a full lineup of poses ready to be drawn over. So, like I say, pretty time-saving stuff. Between what comes included when you first download Clip Studio and the absolute mountains of stuff available in the asset library, there are plenty of models and preset poses to choose from, both for characters and for props and furniture and pretty much anything else that you might need. All you have to do is download the ones that you want and then drag them directly from your materials palette onto your canvas. And then from there, you can kind of just pose them any which way you want. If you want to work on characters with different body types as well, Clip Studio once again has you covered, because you can customize the proportions of, at least certainly these human models, to a hilarious degree. Everything from their hand poses to their limb length, right down to their thickness with 2 C's. Unfortunately, my software really did not want to record the actual interface that lets you adjust all of that stuff, but I will try to at least put a screenshot up somewhere so that you guys can see what that sliding scale sort of looks like. But yeah, the main point is, it's all adjustable, and as you can probably tell from what's happening on screen right now, I had maybe a little bit too much fun playing around with it. Anyway, since that was the final handy-dandy shortcut that I wanted to share today, I reckon it's probably about time to see just how much difference this redesign really made. Well, that is just about it for today. I don't really tend to do these kinds of instructional videos very often, so hopefully there were at least a few helpful tips to be found in this one. If it wasn't already obvious by now, I would definitely recommend trying out some of these features. They've definitely streamlined my process, so if you would like to give Clip Studio a spin for yourself, there's going to be a link down in the description where you can get a free trial that lasts for 3 whole months. For now anyway though, thank you very much for tuning into this video. I hope you've had a nice time, and I hope you're all staying as safe, happy, and healthy as you possibly can. I'll see you next time.